We also announced a further £350 million to get Britain building and deliver 1.5 million new homes our country desperately needs, including more affordable homes. We've slashed red tape that holds businesses and working people back, creating 10,000 more apprentices. This morning I have meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to have played my part in helping draft what has now become the Employment Rights Bill. A new poll shows 3/4 of the British public back the stronger rights for workers in the bill, including better sick pay. Yet that lot over there,
Keir Starmer spoke at the PMQs today, and as usual, a ferocious row broke out. The reason for today's violent outburst came from the perceived attempt to dodge questions by Starmer.
Pay or the living wage. Mr. Speaker, our statutory sick pay is ranked one of the lowest in Europe. It needs to be brought in line with the living wage. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign to strengthen this bill further so sick pay is at the level that finally stops punishing workers for being sick?
Mr. Speaker, our plan for change delivers the biggest upgrade in workers' rights in a generation to our employment rights bill. Ending exploitative zero-hour contracts, ending the scandal of fire and rehire, extending statutory sick pay to 1.3 million employees. Of course, that's on top of the pay rise for 3 million of the lowest paid. I would have thought the Leader of the Opposition might actually sort of support day one protection employment rights, given where she's going, but she thinks maternity leave is excessive. Our plan is pro-worker and pro-growth.
Yeah. Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Beno.
The Chamber was charged with an explosive confrontation that exposed Labour leaders' weaknesses at a time when the country sorely needs strong, unambiguous leadership. Frankly, Starmer will need a lot of help convincing voters he is what Britons need at this time.
Prime Minister now. The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. He needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas, and government lawyers accepted this. Is the Prime Minister allowing lawyers to change the position on Israel? And was this because of advice from the Attorney General? And if not, why on earth did government lawyers accept the argument that Israeli actions were indiscriminate?
They put the complete opposite argument. She talks about on top of her breath. She has no idea what she's talking about. I'll tell her again. We need to change the law. That's why the Home Secretary is already closing the gap. I know the script doesn't allow any adaptation, but this is getting tedious.
Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, wasted little time in starting a series of explosive questions right away. She zeroed in on the divisive Ukraine family programme and the obvious discrepancies in the treatment of situations like the one involving a family from Gaza. Using a strong tone and relentless emphasis, she had Starmer scrambling.
He needs to make sure that we deliver for growth now as well as the future. To grow our economy, we must get more people off sickness and welfare and into work. Clauses 8 and 9 of the unemployment bill take us in the opposite direction by increasing entitlements. His government itself estimates that these changes will increase business costs from £600 million to £1 billion a year in sick pay. That will mean higher prices, fewer jobs, less growth. Will he drop these measures from the bill?
No, Mr. Speaker, I think they're good for workers and good for growth. This is the same argument they made against the minimum wage and every protection for workers. And she says they're their ideas. Mr. Speaker, she says...
It was clear Starmer was finding it difficult to keep up with the tempo as the practice progressed. But rather than provide the clear, forthright responses demanded of a leader, he turned to a sequence of evasions, routinely shifting blame by pointing fingers at choices taken by the former government.
they want means testing. That means a cut. The difference is they cut pensions, we're increasing them.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Berno.
Mr. Speaker, may I take this opportunity to solemnly commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and we remember the 6 million Jewish men, women and children who were murdered. The Holocaust stands as a unique evil in human history. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister set his growth test. He said if a policy is good for growth, the answer is yes. If it's not, the answer is no. This morning, the Chancellor embraced a series of Conservative policies. Although many are welcomed, they will take years to deliver. Mr. Speaker, when Conservatives left office, we had the fastest economic growth in the G7. But what is the government?
Badenoch asked brutal lines of questions. She pushed him constantly, and Starmer's response each time was a hazy reiteration of bureaucratic platitudes. His answers included that the Home Secretary was already working on the matter, that the decision on the issue was made within the existing legal framework, and that Parliament should determine the rules.
Marked contrast to behaviour in the last 14 years. And she talks about immigration, record levels of immigration under the previous government, nearly 1 million. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one urging on the removal of the caps for work visas. She was thanking the previous Home Secretary for the work that was done. She championed it. She advocated it. Record numbers of immigration.
These responses, however, did nothing to probe the essence of her question. Rather, they presented an image of a leader devoid of the conviction to act when it counted.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government, according to the legal framework of the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear.
The display was embarrassing as much as revealing. Starmer's answers grew more confused as Badenoch shot off question after question. Starmer insisted that the Home Secretary was handling the matter at one point when pressed on whether he would really challenge the ruling allowing a family from Gaza to use the Ukraine Family Scheme.
They lost control of immigration. We had nearly 1 million people come into this country, had an open borders experiment. On a Monday of this week, they voted against increased powers to deal with those that are running the vile trade of people smuggling. Same old Tories, open borders, empty promises.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights.
Rather than answering the question personally, he reiterated that he had already promised to close the loophole, therefore altering the legislation. For his detractors, Starmer's constant reliance on practiced formula responses has now become a cause for concern. Every missed question, every vague yes that leaves important concerns unresolved, erases the picture of a leader who is both in charge and totally competent at negotiating the complexity of national policy. The sharp contrast between the heated questioning of Badenoch and Starmer's measured, even responses, and attempts to deflect the debate from responsibility, makes this exchange so startling. Badenoch's annoyance erupted at one point when she charged Starmer with not paying attention and being overly preoccupied with the international human rights framework, instead of addressing the immediate domestic consequences of the court ruling.
You say in your piece also you were struck by the number of immigrants who hate Israel, to use your words. Who do you mean, and how do you know that?
Well, because we're seeing it on social media, we're hearing it. One of the things that I found most upsetting after October 7th was watching people rip down posters of missing, kidnapped children from walls and lampposts in London. We've never seen that here before. I think that is beyond the pale. How do you know that people who did that are recent immigrants? And if you say you saw that on social media, do you think social media is always a reliable source from where to get your views? Well, we can get into the nitty-gritty of that. I didn't say only recent immigrants hate Israel.
Her pointed inquiry on whether he would support proposals to tighten the procedure for obtaining indefinite permission to remain, which is basically asking whether a British passport should be regarded as a privilege rather than a right, sent the Parliament into a frenzy. Starmer then underlined that the Home Secretary's staff was already on the case instead of pledging a firm position. This kind of circumspection not only failed to meet the audience's desire for responsibility, but also left Starmer looking more and more disconnected from the pressing reality the nation faces.
Mr. Speaker, what did they deliver in 14 years? Low growth, stagnant economy, a disastrous mini-budget, a £22 billion PAC, and now she wants to give me advice on running the economy. I don't want to be rude, but no, thank you very much.
The leadership of Labour and this PMQs performance have serious consequences that go much beyond the revered halls of Parliament. The requirement of a leader who can clearly, uncompromisingly explain his vision is especially important at a time when the UK is juggling several crises, from the economic impact of global instability to pressing internal concerns including immigration and social inequality.
I want to pay tribute to Jeremy Corbyn, who's a friend as well as a colleague.
You wouldn't call Jeremy Corbyn a friend?
No. We have to make the case for freedom of movement. We don't want open borders. Freedom of movement has gone and it's not coming back.
Cutting off power, cutting off water,
Well, I think that Israel...
Critics contend that this consistent inability to interact with difficult subjects not only erodes public faith in his leadership capacity, but also points to a deeper crisis inside Labour, already reeling from internal strife and a series of unpopular policies.
I want to pay tribute to Jeremy Corbyn, who's a friend as well as a colleague.
You wouldn't call Jeremy Corbyn a friend?
No. We have to make the case for freedom of movement. We don't want open borders. Freedom of movement has gone and it's not coming back.
Cutting off power, cutting off water,
Well, I think that Israel...
There is now a problem persuading the voters that it can present a realistic substitute for the present government. The wider consequences of Starmer's acts transcend beyond party politics by quite a distance. These kinds of events are potent markers of leadership failure. In the politically charged environment of today, deep mistrust of political institutions results from the public seeing their elected representatives struggling to offer simple solutions on matters directly affecting their lives, be it immigration policy, national security, or the right to family life.
And when it comes to winter fuel payments, they're having a competition, as I understand. They're going to be voting later on today. Well, his shadow housing minister, we found this. She's the favourite, I think. Some of them will be probably voting for her this afternoon.
So, many people are left wondering if the Labour leader fails to meet the challenge, who else can? Following Starmer's clumsy answers, given the many urgent problems the country is confronting right now, this crisis of confidence is very perilous. The demand for strong, clear leadership has never been more important, as arguments over economic inequality, the direction of public services, and the nation's position in a globe growingly unstable rage. But today's PMQs showed that Labour's leadership seems more focused on avoiding responsibility and adhering to antiquated talking themes than on providing fresh ideas.
No answer to investigating dodgy Labour ministers, just as last week he didn't want an inquiry that might expose dodgy Labour councils. The Prime Minister, knowingly appointed a convicted fraudster as his transport secretary. The anti-corruption minister he had full confidence in only days ago resigned yesterday in disgrace. He is negotiating a secret deal to surrender British territory.
Kemi Badenoch's furious questioning and Starmer's quiet, rehearsed responses signalled a party in crisis and a leader trying to get back on his feet. The price of the evading question, every moment of doubt, every instance in which Starmer hesitated to respond directly, adds to the mounting story of Labour's chaos. Kemi Badenoch's relentless interrogation revealed not only a brief lapse in leadership, but also a structural lack of adaptation to the pressures of contemporary responsible government. There is a great price for this behaviour, and Labour might pay it in the next elections.
Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a first-generation immigrant, can I welcome the Home Secretary's statement, which I feel this immigration white paper is a move from the 20th century to a much better future immigration system. In particular, I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for removing the annual limits on work visas and also on international students, both of which I lobbied for.
Already disappointed by hollow promises and internal strife, voters are more inclined to turn away from a party that seems unable to face the challenges. So, every uncertain yes and every evaded inquiry chips away at the confidence that is so much required to mount an effective opposition, given the stakes are higher than ever. Moreover, the influence of today's PMQs goes beyond only short political consequences. Ignorance of direct answers to difficult topics can have long-lasting effects on public opinion and policy creation.
That we should be giving up British territory in Chagos. He is rushing a deal which will be disastrous and which will land taxpayers with a multi-billion pound.
So, Starmer must do better than he did at today's PMQs if Labour is going to stand any chance of retaining the goodwill of the voters as it did in the last elections. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating political content.